In lesson 3, we are writing more methods. These are just going to be void methods. They could have parameters, but they don't have to. So we'll look at some examples of both. Often void methods are what we call mutator methods. They're going to change the state of the object, okay, like private instance variables, but they don't have to. So, we'll start with just more of a basic void method here. Doesn't return anything, but it could print. So we'll write like a basic print method, and I'll call it print last first. And so we're working with the same student class we saw yesterday. Got the same instance fields, so including a first and last name, ID number, and grade level. Same 2 constructors we saw yesterday. And I've put in all 4 of our basic accessor methods here, as well as the toString that we learned about yesterday as well. So we're going to add a method that is going to be called print last first, and it's going to print their student's last name, then a comma and a space, followed by their first name, right? And since this is a void method, we can't return this as a string, but we could use a system out print and then see it appear in the console area. And so right now, if I turned this line of code on, I'd get an error message, just like we did in our last video, because right now this method hasn't been written yet. So for this to work, I'd have to write this method. And again, this is going to be a void method, not a return method. So again, also it doesn't really matter where we put this. I'll just put it up at the top of the other methods, but that's not a rule. And it does have to have that name, though. It has to be called print last first. And since I was accessing the method over here without any type of parameter being provided, then I'm not going to request one on this. These 2 have to match. And I shouldn't need any parameters, because if I'm accessing this method through a student reference, which I will be, then I'll have access over here to the properties of this AHS student. So what I'm going to do is, instead of returning, I'm going to write a print line. And on this print line, I'm going to print their last name, okay, followed by a concatenation of a comma and a space, right, followed by their first name. And what I hope to see now is that I'm hoping that this error message will disappear, because now I have a method by this name with the correct parameter setting. I have avoided the return because I don't see the need to return anything. I'm just printing. Imagine that did say int or string or double, then what would you return, right? It wasn't really described in the instructions here to make a return. But we did print to the console area this student. Okay. Now, since this method was voided on the user's end, they can't really do anything with it other than call it, right? So for example, let's say a user of this method tried to create a string out of it. It doesn't work that way. That can only be done if the method is returning something. We learned that in lesson 2, but I'm just trying to refresh your memory a little bit. And the same thing would happen if a user took a voided method and tried to run like a print of it. Again, it's going to tell me that void is not allowed here, so you can't try to print a voided method call. Again, all you can do is really call it. Now, the method then takes whatever action it was told to do by whoever wrote the source code, and in this case, that was me, and I chose to make it. Right, that's one application of just a real basic void method without any type of parameter. Now, a more common and maybe useful one is what we call a mutator method. So we've seen how in the class, in this case AHS student, all of the instance variables were set to private. So how do we make changes to those variables unless we're actually in the source code? And if we started creating students from that class, how could we later go back and make changes if we've been denied direct access to the variables of that class? Well, that's where a mutator method is. So let's say we wrote a method called grade promotion. Right, so our student right now is in 9th grade. Well, when they finish, let's go ahead and put them into 10th grade, right? And then eventually they'll go to 11th grade and so on. So this method is going to increment their grade 1 level But again, this is where we can kind of limit the ability of the users of our code. So we'll go ahead and cap them off at 12. We'll only promote their grade provided that their current grade level is less than 12. All right. And we're not going to take in a parameter here. We're just going to go ahead and call it. All right. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to write a method and call it public void. And again, part of the reason I'm voiding this is just because I don't see a need to return anything. Like if I was going to return, what would I return? You know, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take their current grade level and I'm going to increment it. Now, if I just did that, they could actually go beyond 12, 13, 14. So as the directions kind of implied, I'm going to put if here, and I'm only going to allow this to take place provided that their current grade level has not yet reached 12. I don't need an else, right? Like if I just fail to take this action, then I fail to take this action. Over in the main, I forgot to turn on the calls. Let's turn on this block of code, and let's see how Troy's grade level promotion goes. Now, first, he's going to be in ninth grade because that's how my constructor was set up, that if you only give a name, it puts them into ninth grade automatically. Okay, so when we made this student, since we didn't say their grade, I defaulted it to 9. Okay, that's why Troy was in ninth grade originally. At that point, okay, I promoted Troy to 10th grade, and so they get grade level when called on Troy's student reference. Stu2 said 10. You'll notice then that I called the method 4 times, but he didn't go into 14th grade. Once it reached 12, it cut off because of the way we wrote that if. All right, another way we could write a modifier method here would be to put in a parameter. Okay, so for example, let's say we wanted to be able to change Troy's first name. Okay, then we could write a method that accepted a string and then used that method to change his name. So who knows, maybe it looks something like this. Maybe like stu2 dot change first name, and we'll could put in something here, and we'll just put in like his initial. All right. So maybe he wants to be known as T. Okay. Well, this doesn't just work. You can't just like write code like this and just think, oh, it's going to go do it. Tell it to do this. It'd be cool. It's not quite that advanced. There'd have to be a method by this name that existed in the class where stu2 came from, which is AHS student. And that method would have to then accept a string since it's being passed one. So if we came over here, now we could write a method. It would have to be set to public access so that people can see it from some other class. I don't need to return a string, right? In fact, I don't really see the need to return anything. So I'm going to void the return. But what I am going to do is I'm going to accept a string. Okay, and maybe I'll call that string like new name, and then I'm going to change the value assigned to the first name of this student. So when I'm writing code over here in the source level, I have access to this private variable. If I tried to reach that private variable over here, okay, like if I did something like this and I wrote stu2 dot first name T, well, just like we saw in our lesson 1 video, since this variable was set to private access, you can't do that. But if we wrote a method that allowed you to change a student's first name and we made it public, then somebody could do this, and now we'll see that name change. So I'm going to go ahead and throw in 2 more print statements here, just so we can make a quick check if this worked or not. So let's go ahead and print stu2. Remember, that's going to implicitly invoke the toString method, right, for this student. And then we'll call it again. We'll see if Troy's name changed. So this is another type of what we would call a modifier or a mutator method. And you can see nothing changed otherwise, right? He kept the same ID number that was randomly generated, kept the same grade level, kept the same last name, but we changed his first name through this method. Okay.